John?
Temperature readings have been manipulated at the primary climate data centers in the United States in order to support the global warming agenda. Now, that's a strong new statement that's never been said on television before, but I want to emphasize it. After 1,000 hours or more of research, a computer programmer and a certified consulting meteorologist found that temperature data has been manipulated at U.S. government climate centers. The altered temperatures seem designed to support the global warming agenda. This is breaking news. The two key centers involved are the National Climate Data Center at Asheville, North Carolina, and the NASA Goddard Institute of Space Studies at Columbia University in New York City. Here's what this means. When you see a news report that the government has found that a certain month or season of the year was the warmest in history, or that 5 of the warmest years on record were in the last decade, don't believe it. Those reports are based on manipulated data. This information from the U.S. parallels what we learned in late November from the huge leak at the East Anglia University Climate Center in England. There are 4 key revelations about the U.S. data centers. First, the computer programs used at those centers to calculate world temperature averages have been dramatically altered so that the final computer product no longer averages actual temperatures from actual locations. Instead, those researchers are pulling numbers from locations which may be hundreds of miles away and applying them to that area. Secondly, the number of weather observation points has been dramatically reduced from about 6,000 to only about 1,000. Third, the vast majority of the weather stations that were eliminated were those in cooler locations at higher latitudes and elevations. And fourth, the temperatures themselves are being altered by so-called homogenization, a process that seems to always result in warmer output readings. So who are the men behind these stunning discoveries? E. Michael Smith, a computer programmer from San Jose, California, and certified consulting meteorologist Joseph DeLeo from Hudson, New Hampshire. Michael, you apparently have really discovered some significant problems with the American temperature data set, the one that our U.S. government uses to proclaim that this month or this year is the 1st or 5th warmest in all history. Are you telling me that those proclamations are based on bad data?
Yes, largely because the cold thermometers have been removed from the temperature data series.
I don't exactly understand, but I want to begin with, why did you get interested in this issue to start with?
Well, I had been looking at the global warming issue and thought it should be looked at to find out why it was happening. The more I looked, the more I found out it wasn't happening. When I looked in the data, I found a pattern of deletion of thermometers that was surprising, to say the least.
What do you mean by that?
At the peak, there were about 6,000 thermometers in the data series, and then around 1989 to 1990, it suddenly plummeted to around 1,500.
So let's clear this up now. You're talking about around the entire globe of the world, planet Earth, there were about 6,000 points where they were measuring the temperature and reporting it, and it was going into this data set.
That's correct.
And this was around 1970. And you're saying by 1990 they'd stopped taking the temperature at most of those places? You only had 1,500 left?
Well, in most of those places, someone was still measuring the temperature. You still had people in China and the United States thinking they're taking the temperature. But when that temperature measurement went to the NCDC, National Climate Data Center, they dropped it from the data set. So the Global Historic Climate data set, what everyone uses for these maps, the data flows in, but it never flows out.
So now we have data sets in the 1990s based on, let's say, 1,500 temperatures, and previous years on 6,000, and were they comparing one to the other?
Yes, the baseline...
That's apples and oranges, isn't it?
I think it's worse than apples and oranges, but that's the metaphor. They were comparing a period from 1950 to 1980 where they had thermometers in cold places with a current set of temperatures where they had deleted the thermometers from the cold places.
Now, wait a minute. Not only did they delete, but they deleted in a pattern?
Yes. So, for example, in California, in the GHCN data set, there are 4 surviving thermometers, 1 at San Francisco Airport and 3 down near LA. How do you measure the snowy Sierra Nevadas when your thermometer is on the beach in San Diego?
Or the temperature in Fresno, Bakersfield, or Death Valley.
Or any of them.
No.
They simply do not exist in the data set.
And is this true all around the world?
They exist in the baseline, but they don't exist in the current temperatures. And yes, it's true around the world. One of the more startling ones I ran into is Bolivia. There's a wonderful baseline for Bolivia, a very high mountainous country, right up until 1990 when the data ends. And if you look on the November 2009 anomaly map, you'll see a very red, rosy, hot Bolivia. How do you get a hot Bolivia when you haven't measured the temperature for 20 years?
Well, how do you?
They take the temperature from places up to 1,200 kilometers away and copy it in. They fill in with what they've got. And what they've got is the beach in Peru and the Amazon jungle.
Now, you're telling me that they've cut off temperatures. Let's say the Northwest Territory, northern Canada. Have those dropped out of the data set?
There is no longer any surviving thermometer in the Northwest Territories or Yukon. Those are filled in from somewhere else, which, because there's none in the Arctic either, has to be somewhere more southerly or closer to the ocean where it's warmer.
I now turn to Joe DeLeo, and I need to tell you that Joe and I are friends and colleagues. We have a long relationship. Joe helped with my forecasting when I was on Good Morning America back in the 1970s. Then he was my director of meteorology at the Weather Channel. Joe says he was not surprised at what E. Michael Smith discovered.
Increasingly in recent years, there's been a discrepancy that's grown between the satellite assessment of global temperatures and the land-based assessment. For example, in June of this year, the national centers announced that it was the second warmest June in 130 years for the planet, while the satellite told us it was the 14th or 15th coldest year in 31 years that they've been keeping records. Obviously, both can't be true.
You're talking about points on the planet where there are thermometers, where the thermometer is read and that is put into the computer network and becomes part of the database. Those are observation stations. You're saying that around planet Earth, 6,000 of them were going into the database in the 70s, and that has been reduced by over 75% down to 1,000.
Right.
Why has that been done?
We can only surmise that it was done to show more warming because of the way it was done, country by country.
I would like, if you could, to take a U.S. state. Let's take California as an example. It has coastline, has the Central Valley, has the big Sierra mountain range, and certainly highly diverse weather from one of those regions to the others.
In California, and in fact for the rest of the world too, they seem to have a disdain for mountains.
Are we comparing this data from this 1,000 stations with the data from the 6,000, or did they go back and recalculate all the old data?
No, unfortunately, what they've done is they did their average based on the old network, which with all its cold stations, and they're taking only the current data and comparing that to the averages from before and ensuring that you're going to find warming.
Joe, this is the United States government. How
Yes.
can they do this?
We ask ourselves that question every day. How can they do this? How can the Hadley Center do this? How can the NASA Center allow this to happen? Follow the money, I guess, is the answer.
Are you saying to us that if we hear a pronouncement from the National Data Climate Center, from the National Weather Service, from NOAA, all part of our United States federal government, that 2009 was, let's say, the 5th warmest year in history or something of that sort, that it is based on manipulated data?
Absolutely.
Now, about this homogenization manipulation, in order to supposedly adjust for new thermometers and other changes in the observation points, the data center has come up with a formula to adjust the output temperatures. But Smith and DeLeo's examination shows that that always seems to produce a warming effect.